It began with a listing a $9.3 million oceanfront property once owned by Johnny Carson, perched on the edge of Malibu's Point Dume, overlooking the same waves that carried his laughter into the homes of millions. When the new owners, a couple in their late 40s named Mark and Elaine, moved in, they described the place as eerily preserved, almost as if its former owner had just stepped out for a walk along the beach. Within the first week, something strange began to surface, a faint, rhythmic tapping that echoed through the hallway facing the Pacific. At first, Mark blamed the sea breeze pushing at the old window panes. But the sound was too deliberate, always 3 taps. Then silence. Always around 11:30 p.m., the exact time Carson used to sign off The Tonight Show. When they asked the previous caretaker about it, he smiled nervously. "You'll get used to that," he said. Mr. Carson had this habit, tapping his pen before every cue. The wood here still remembers it. Place frozen in time. The house itself was an architectural reflection of Carson's precise taste, modernist lines, teakwood paneling, and walls of glass that looked out toward the endless blue. But beneath its beauty, the home had a coldness that no California sun could melt. The couple began noticing things that made them uneasy, though never outright terrifying. A drawer left open in Carson's old office, faint static on the intercom system, the smell of tobacco lingering after midnight. Elaine started recording the sounds, the tapping, the distant voice that sometimes followed. She played them for a neighbor, a retired audio engineer named Lou, who had worked in broadcasting. Lou ran the recordings through his old software, expecting wind distortion. What he found instead was a human voice buried in the frequency range of 60 to 80 hertz, too low for normal speech. "It's not your imagination," Lou said, frowning at the screen. "That's someone saying something like, 'Cue's ready.' Evidence in the walls." Curious and unsettled, Mark decided to check the house's wiring. He found that the intercom system was still connected to a small power circuit hidden behind the office wall, despite being listed as disconnected years earlier. Inside the cavity was a dusty tape reel and a handwritten note, "Backup Cue light, Carson's request." The date read October 1984. He sent the reel to a small restoration shop in Santa Monica. The technician reported that the tape contained fragments of old rehearsal audio, muffled laughter, snippets of music, and Carson's unmistakable voice practicing lines. But toward the end, something didn't match. The technician called Mark the next day, disturbed. "I've worked with vintage recordings my whole life," he said. "But this one keeps changing. The same reel, different playback. Last night, it had a voice whispering under his, and it said your name, Mark." The tests. In disbelief, Mark tried a rational experiment. He disconnected the entire power grid to the office one evening, even shut off the breakers leading to the intercom. Elaine stayed in the hallway with her phone recording. They waited. At 11:30 p.m., as the surf crashed outside, the 3 taps came again, perfectly spaced, impossibly clear. Elaine froze. The sound wasn't coming from inside the wall this time. It came from the desk itself, the same mahogany desk where Johnny had written his cue notes. When they tapped back, 3 short knocks, silence, then a 4th, delayed one, almost like a reply. "Neighbors remember." Word spread quietly through Point Dume. Their nearest neighbor, an elderly woman named Marjorie who'd lived there since the 70s, wasn't surprised. "Johnny never liked to leave things unfinished," she said. "After his last show, he'd sit on that deck for hours, just watching the ocean. He used to say the waves talk back, same rhythm, every night." A week later, Elaine stood on that deck at dusk. The tide rolled in, matching the same pattern. 3 soft waves, then a pause, then one final break that hit harder. She whispered, "Good night, Johnny." And for the first time in weeks, the tapping stopped. But when they played the audio from that night, there was something else, faint but audible beneath the sound of the sea, a man's voice, steady and familiar, saying, "And now, for our final guest." Elaine began to spend her evenings in the office, the one that still smelled faintly of tobacco and cedar polish. She told herself it was curiosity. She wanted to document everything, not to chase ghosts, but to prove to herself that what they heard had a rational explanation. She placed her phone on the desk, microphone open, facing the bay window where the glass met the sea. The Pacific rolled in heavy and slow, like a sleeping thing turning over. The house creaked softly, as if adjusting to the night. At 11:27 p.m., the minute hand edging toward the ritual moment, she felt that familiar tightness in her chest, not fear exactly, but anticipation, a sort of electric readiness. Then 3 taps. Soft, deliberate. She didn't move. The sound came from the exact same spot as before, the lower right drawer. She leaned in, whispering, "Johnny." The silence that followed was immense. Even the surf seemed to draw back. Then the 4th tap came, much softer, almost hesitant, like a response from someone who didn't quite remember how to speak. When she played back the recording the next morning, there was a strange undertone between the taps, a faint hum, low and metallic. She analyzed it through an app that converted sound into frequency bands. The hum traced a repeating pattern, rising slightly at the end of each sequence, almost like a voice modulating through static. Mark thought it was feedback from the metal framing inside the walls, but the sound persisted even when the power was cut, even when they removed every electronic device from the room. Lou, the retired sound engineer, visited again a few nights later. He brought with him an old analog recorder, the kind with magnetic tape reels, claiming it was less prone to interference. The 3 of them sat quietly in the darkened office, the only light coming from the red glow of the machine's record button. At exactly 11:30, the air in the room seemed to change. The temperature dropped several degrees, and the smell of ocean salt became stronger, as if the sea itself had seeped into the walls. 3 taps, then 4. Lou's hands trembled slightly as he watched the recorder's needles twitch. When the noise stopped, he rewound the tape and played it back. For several seconds, there was nothing but ambient hiss, then the tapping, clear as day. And behind it, faintly but unmistakably, a man's voice. "Stand by." Lou stopped the tape. The 3 of them sat frozen. "That's a broadcast term," he whispered. He said it before every cut. This is his voice. I'd stake my reputation on it. Over the following days, Mark noticed subtle changes in the house. The hallway lights sometimes flickered exactly once at the same hour each night, even after the electrician replaced the entire system. A faint scent of cologne, old-fashioned, woody, lingered in the air near the studio door. And sometimes, late at night, the sliding glass panels facing the ocean would shift slightly open, no matter how firmly they'd been locked. Elaine began leaving small notes on the desk, handwritten on yellow stationery. "Thank you for the laughter. We're taking good care of your home." In the morning, she'd find them moved, slightly bent at the corner, as if someone had brushed a hand across them. Mark wanted to believe it was her imagination, but one morning, when he came downstairs early, he found the intercom light glowing red again. He hadn't touched that system in weeks. He pressed the button and whispered, "If someone's there, say something." The speaker hissed softly, then went silent. And then, faintly, the voice came through, distorted by age and static, calm and familiar. "We'll be right back." That night, Mark didn't sleep. He sat on the deck until sunrise, watching the tide pull away from the shore. He thought about how Johnny Carson had retired to this house, how he'd spent his final years here, avoiding cameras, chasing quiet. Maybe, Mark thought, the man's spirit wasn't trapped. Maybe it simply hadn't finished its last broadcast. Maybe this house was the stage that never closed. Elaine came outside, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "Do you think he knows we hear him?" she asked quietly. Mark nodded. "I think he's making sure the show goes on." The waves rolled in, 3 at a time, the same pattern that had echoed through every recording. The house stood silent, but something in its stillness felt alive, not threatening, but watchful, as if waiting for the next cue. Inside, the red light on the intercom flickered once, then stayed on. "Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story." Mark began to notice how the light changed in that house differently from any place he'd ever lived. It wasn't just the golden Malibu glow that poured through the tall glass panels at dusk. It was the way the air thickened when the sun went down, as if the house itself inhaled with the tide. He had always believed old homes carried an echo of their former owners, but this one behaved like it was still waiting for direction, for someone to tell it when to start the show. He started documenting everything. Each sound, each flicker, each movement of the curtains when there wasn't a hint of wind. He bought a small logbook and labeled each entry by time and temperature. On October 11th, he wrote, 11:30 p.m., tapping again. Sounded closer this time. Elaine asleep. Air felt heavy like pressure before rain. Thought I heard faint laughter, one exhale, like someone remembering a joke. By the end of the week, the notebook filled fast. There were pages describing footsteps on the deck, a lamp that turned itself on when they spoke Carson's name, and a smell of sea salt mixed with cigarette smoke that came and went without pattern. One evening, Mark stood in front of the mirror in the hallway, brushing his teeth before bed. Behind him, through the reflection, he saw the office door slightly ajar. He was sure he'd closed it earlier. The sound came again, a faint, rhythmic click, like someone pressing the button of a ballpoint pen over and over. He turned off the faucet and just listened. The house had gone perfectly still. The ocean outside had fallen quiet too, like it was holding its breath. He stepped toward the door, careful not to make the floorboards creak. Inside, the air was colder, sharp, the kind that smells faintly of metal. On the desk, the small lamp glowed dimly, the same one Elaine used for her late-night notes. But she wasn't there. Mark looked down at the blotter and froze. There was a fresh indentation pressed into the paper, the looping signature of a J, followed by what looked like the start of an O. He touched it. The ink wasn't there, but the groove was. Someone had written, without ink, without pen, just pressure. He stepped back, his pulse in his throat. The desk phone beside it, a heavy beige model from the 70s, clicked twice, as though someone had picked up the line and hung up again. He unplugged it from the wall. The click came again. Elaine tried to reassure him the next morning, though her voice lacked conviction. Maybe you're tired. Maybe this house is playing tricks on both of us, she said. But she avoided eye contact, and he noticed her hands trembling slightly when she poured her coffee. Then she told him something she hadn't mentioned before. I was out on the deck last night, around 2. Couldn't sleep. I thought I heard him or something. A man's voice, low, like it came from the sand. He said, "Don't leave the light off." Mark went silent. They both looked toward the ocean through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The tide was pulling back, the pale blue horizon stretching forever. Later that afternoon, they called the local history society in Malibu, hoping to trace any details about the house's wiring or renovations from Carson's era. A woman named Denise called them back. "That property's got a strange record," she said. "Every owner after Carson made minimal changes, like they were afraid to touch anything. But one man, a producer, tried to remodel the studio in 2003. He only stayed 6 months. Told the papers it was impossible to make the walls stop talking." She paused. "There's an audio engineer's note in the archive, something about residual signal frequencies in the main room. Might be an artifact from old broadcast equipment. But you can't ignore how consistent it is. Same time every night." That evening, they decided to record again, but this time, they used 2 recorders. One digital, one analog. Elaine placed the analog one on the desk, where the signature groove had appeared, and Mark positioned the digital recorder on the deck outside, facing the water. When they reviewed the footage the next morning, both devices had captured sound, but not the same sound. The one inside the office had picked up the pen taps and a voice saying something that might have been, "Go to break." The one outside had caught faint laughter, like a live studio audience heard through miles of fog. The strangest part? The timestamps didn't match. The exterior recording was 3 minutes ahead, exactly the duration of a commercial break. They sat in silence for a long time afterward. The Pacific shimmered under a pale gray sky, calm and endless. Somewhere below, under the white noise of the waves, the house seemed to hum faintly, as though power flowed through wires long since disconnected. Elaine whispered, "It's like he's still hosting, isn't it? The sea is the audience, and we're just guests." Mark didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the intercom, where the red light had turned on again, steady this time, glowing in the morning sun like a heartbeat that refused to stop. By late November, the couple had grown accustomed to living beside the strange pulse of that house, the red intercom glow, the scent of salt and smoke, the nightly rhythm of the waves matching the phantom cue. But something changed on the first night. A storm came in off the Pacific. The wind howled through Point Dume like a freight train, driving sheets of rain against the glass. Mark was in the office, trying to secure the balcony door when he heard it again. 3 taps. Then 4. But this time it wasn't faint or distant. It was thunderous, close, vibrating through the desk. He spun around. The old lamp blinked twice and went dark. He called for Elaine. No answer. Lightning flared, throwing the room into a flash of white, and for a split second he saw something reflected in the window, just the faintest silhouette of a man standing at the deck railing, looking toward the sea, hands clasped behind his back. Then it was gone. When the power came back on, Elaine was standing in the doorway, pale, soaked through. "You saw him too," she said quietly, not as a question but as a statement. They sat up until dawn, the storm easing to drizzle. When the clouds thinned, the intercom light was still on, steady and bright, humming faintly. The hum carried a low tone beneath it, a sound both of them could feel in their chests. Mark pressed his ear to the speaker. Through the static, he caught the faint echo of applause. The following day, they drove to the county archives in Santa Monica. The clerk brought out a folder marked Carson Residence 1983 to 1991. Inside were sketches of the home's renovation and a typed note on NBC letterhead, "Studio equipment to remain in personal quarters, per request." At the bottom, handwritten in blue ink, "Keep the feed live." Elaine looked at Mark. "He didn't want it to end," she whispered. They returned home before dusk. The ocean was flat and gray, almost colorless. Inside, everything was as they'd left it except the notebook on the desk. Its pages were fluttering though no air stirred. When they stopped, a new line had been indented on the last page. "Show's not over." That night, Mark tried to disconnect everything, pulled the breakers, cut the main power line from the studio wall, even removed the batteries from the old smoke detector that sometimes clicked in rhythm with the tapping. The house went dark. For the first time since they'd moved in, there wasn't a single light. But as midnight neared, the faintest bluish glow began to spread across the glass walls facing the ocean. It wasn't lightning or the moon, it came from within the room itself, an invisible source that bathed everything in that surreal studio hue. The intercom flickered back to life even though it was unplugged. And then came the voice, clear this time, aged yet steady, with that unmistakable timbre. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen." Elaine gasped. It was Carson's introduction, word for word from an old broadcast. But this wasn't a recording. The words were slightly different, reshaped as if he were speaking to them. "Tonight we have 2 guests." The room filled with the faint rustle of an audience. Applause swelled, not loud but layered, like dozens of people clapping through water. Mark stood frozen, his hands trembling. The lamp flicked on by itself. The desk phone buzzed once, then again, and stopped. "Mark," the voice said softly. He turned toward the intercom, his throat dry. "Yes." For a moment, only static answered. Then, faintly, "Thank you for keeping the lights on." The intercom went dark. The glow vanished. Morning arrived sharp and silent. The sky was washed clean from the storm. Elaine brewed coffee, her hands steady now. There was peace in the air, a calm that had eluded them for months. When Mark went to the office, he found the window cracked open just enough for a breeze to move through. On the desk lay a single sheet of yellow paper. The indentation was there again, shallow, but unmistakable. "Good night." He closed the window, folded the paper, and slipped it into the notebook. That evening, they sat together on the deck, the sun dissolving into the sea. The tide rolled in 3 waves, a pause, then one last crash. The same rhythm as always. Elaine leaned against him. "Do you think he's gone now?" Mark watched the horizon, where the orange faded to gray. "No," he said quietly. "I think he finally took his bow." Inside, the red light blinked once, then never came on again. The house exhaled. The sea kept applauding. And for the first time since they'd arrived, the silence didn't feel haunted. Felt grateful. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.